Guten Tag. Today I want to talk about a liquid sourdough starter. We will cover 3 points. First of all, why would you want to have a liquid sourdough starter? Secondly, how to use it. And thirdly, how to perform daily maintenance. So why would you want to have a liquid sourdough starter and what's the difference? Normally a sourdough starter always has 100% hydration typically. That's equal parts of flour and water. Now in the last video I was showing you how to convert your sourdough starter from a vinegary taste to a more yogurty taste. So you have a lot more dairy notes inside. The taste definitely changes.
For this to get to work, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bit of my regular sourdough starter, which is at around 100% hydration, and into a clean jar I'm just putting a little bit of this, around 15 grams. Now I'm going to give this another feed. I'm using whole wheat flour in my experience. That works very well. Around double of that. So 30 grams roughly. You can use whatever flour you use to typically feed your sourdough starter, so don't worry too much about that. And now I'm going to give this a lot of water. That was 150 grams, around 5 times of the flour's weight. Don't create such a mess like I'm doing and just keep stirring this nicely. And that's it. That's about all I have to do.
I wouldn't say the liquid sourdough starter is better than the regular sourdough starter, it's just different. The taste of your final sourdough bread is going to change. So it's just a way for you to play with the taste of your final sourdough bread. The way how it works is you're blocking the oxygen. And this means that your sourdough starter is going to produce more lactic acid rather than acetic acid. So yeah, the way you make it is you have your regular sourdough starter and then you just increase the hydration by quite a lot. So you would have 100 grams of sourdough starter and then maybe 500 grams of water. What's going to happen is there's going to be a layer on top of your sourdough starter, and this layer prevents the oxygen flow, and this way the fermentation of the lactic acid bacteria is changing. But we end up having a very liquid sourdough starter, and that's a problem because most recipes always call for a sourdough starter which has 100% hydration. This means with this style of starter you're going to be introducing a lot more water to the actual dough. And that brings me to point number 2, how to actually use this sourdough starter.
Before I use this starter, what I do is I do give it a good stir. This just makes sure that we have a nicely homogenized starter. And just look at that. This is a good sign to look out for. Do you see all those tiny bubbles here? This means that the starter is very nice and active.
So let's talk about how to use a liquid starter. And to do that, let's first look at the regular recipe. A typical sourdough bread always consists of flour, water, and salt. Those are the 3 magic ingredients. Incredible, right? How just 3 ingredients can create something so awesome. So a regular recipe might look like this: 500 grams of flour, 400 grams of water, 100 grams of starter, 10 grams of salt. Bakers always like to use baker's math. This way they can just scale up or down the whole recipe. Baker's math is always calculated based on the flour that you're using. So 400 grams of water for 500 grams of flour, that would be around 80%. And a common question which many of you ask is, okay, doesn't the sourdough starter actually increase the hydration? And yes, it does. That's a great question to ask. It slightly increases the hydration. I don't want to get too mathsy, I don't know even if that's a word, but the final hydration with a little bit of sourdough starter would be at around 82%. Now the problem with the liquid starter, we have to adjust the recipe. That's because the regular starter has around equal parts of flour and water, but with the liquid starter we have way more water inside of the starter. And so my recommendation for you is treat your starter like water. So one more time, the regular recipe on the left hand side and the liquid starter recipe on the right hand side. And now, think about how much starter you want to use. I recommend around 5 to 10% based on the flour. And this is an important lesson to learn. Based on how much sourdough starter you are using, you can influence how fast your sourdough should finish the fermentation process. However, with this liquid starter, you will have a much more active sourdough starter as well. That's because all the microorganisms can move around much easier. It's a gigantic water highway that you have built. So for a regular sourdough recipe, if it were to call for 20% sourdough starter, in my experience around 10% with the liquid starter has exactly the same effect. You'll end up roughly with the same fermentation speed. Just for your info, I think this is something really cool to know. So assuming that I would want to use around 50 grams of starter instead of using 400 grams of water, I'm using 350 grams of water. Of course, overall the total flour and total water slightly changes. But since I don't use exact quantities when setting up my liquid starter, I'm not so sure how much it is exactly. More on that in a little bit when I show you how to do the maintenance. So yeah, one more time, just summarizing this, treat your liquid starter like water. So yeah, I would say the disadvantage of this sourdough starter is that it's a little bit more difficult to use because you have to be more careful. Plus all the recipes you find online always call for either a stiffer starter or a starter at 100% hydration. So if you're just beginning, you might want to stick to the regular starter and not go this route for now. Point number 3, maintenance. The maintenance for this sourdough starter is actually super easy. Let me show you. I like to give the starter one feeding every day. And for that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to put what's in here into my surplus jar, which I store inside of the fridge. And there are probably 2 ways to go about it. Option 1 would be to carefully measure everything. In this case, I have 50 grams left and I'm probably going to feed it with another 50 grams of flour and 250 grams of water. That way I have a starter which typically always has the same performance, which means that the main fermentation of your sourdough is going to be consistent. That way you can better plan. However, if you're using this trick, and like I suggest in my videos where you use a small sample jar to monitor the progress of your fermentation, then that's not required. It might take an hour more, an hour less. It's okay. You got this, which always tells you exactly when your fermentation is done. So the way how I do it, and I'm measuring this for the first time actually, I'm using 2 tablespoons and that's actually 50 grams. And then I'm just giving it a good amount of water. And funnily, this is actually 50 to around 250 grams. And now all I do is I give it a good stir. And that's about it. That's all I do. So 50 grams left, 50 grams new flour, and around 5 times of that in water. Or you can just eyeball it. Eyeballing is totally okay if you use a sample jar like this. If you're the person who likes to have consistent timings, then you might want to measure this. Just please have a note, this is roughly the consistency that you want. So this is of course also producing quite a lot of sourdough starter. You probably can also just use less. So maybe 5 grams of this, 25, and then around another 120 to 150 grams of water. Then you would definitely have less starter. Because when making an actual sourdough bread, I'm also only using 2 or 3 tablespoons, which would be around 30 grams of this. Anyways, this is also new territory to me, so this is the way how I'm doing it right now, but probably there are going to be a few updates. If you have better ideas, please do let me know. With this method, of course, I'm piling up quite a lot of surplus. But my personal favorite bread is also a bread made out of this surplus. I'm going to be linking it right here. It's really super delicious. And this liquid here really makes me think that we can probably make amazing pancakes out of this. Just probably a little bit more flour, but then this would have the perfect consistency. If you're trying it, please do share a recipe in the comments. I would be super excited to read that. Since I'm baking a bread every day or every second day, I'm just keeping this at room temperature. So this is always sitting in my kitchen right here. If I recently fed this less than 24 hours ago, then I would be using something like 30 grams or so to set up my bread. If this sat for longer without a feed, then I would be using less. The cultures are going to regrow in your main dough then, nothing to worry. And just around 2 minutes later, you can already see the water separating from the flour. That brings us to the end of this video. Hope you learned something new and I hope this answered some of your questions. If you have additional questions, please do drop them in the comment section. I would be super curious to read as well whether you're going to try this liquid starter or not. Me personally, I have so many amazing ideas how to use this starter. Just imagine, for instance, super fluffy yogurty sourdough pancakes without any yogurt. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the gluten be with you. Bye!